My name is Talia, and this is the story of the day my family decided I no longer belonged in the home I grew up in. It began when Dad told me without hesitation, "You were a mistake, so why waste a room on you?" His tone carried no anger, only certainty, which somehow hurt worse. Mom stood nearby but refused to meet my eyes, as if pretending she was not part of the conversation would clear her of responsibility. My brother lingered behind them, silent yet visibly pleased, the kind of expression that told me he had been expecting this moment. Dad pointed toward the front door. There was no discussion, no countdown, no chance to defend myself. I held my backpack with one hand and walked out, because staying meant breaking in ways I knew I would never recover from. The door shut the second I stepped outside, and the lock clicked before I could even turn around. The sound echoed in my chest longer than any shout could have. I stood on the walkway, confused, scared, and strangely relieved, because for the first time I understood that the love I had been chasing from them might never have existed in the first place. I did not know where I would sleep that night, but I knew I would not look back. What I did not know was that everything they believed about authority and ownership would collapse with a single phone call, and the truth about who the house really belonged to would change everything. Before we continue, tell me what time it is, where you are, and which city you're watching from. I love seeing all the places this story can reach. I grew up in a house where the line between right and wrong shifted every time Dad's mood changed, or Mom chose silence instead of standing up for me whenever Logan and I clashed. I learned early that rules did not apply the same way to each of us, which created an unspoken hierarchy that shaped everything inside those walls. My brother Logan always seemed to find a way out of trouble no matter how serious the situation was, and the moment he sensed blame approaching, he redirected it so quickly that even the truth felt unsteady. Every time he lied, the story was twisted until it landed on me, often leaving me stunned at how easily my parents accepted whatever version suited them. There were days when Logan pushed boundaries in ways that would have earned me a punishment without question. He skipped chores, ignored curfews, and argued with teachers, yet Dad still offered him comfort while demanding absolute obedience from me. I watched Logan break a neighbor's garden light once, and he insisted I had bumped into it while biking. Dad refused to listen to my explanation and lectured me for disrespecting property, even though I had been inside the house the entire afternoon. His tone with me was sharp and impatient while his voice softened whenever Logan spoke, which made it clear I was expected to carry responsibility for both of us. Mom rarely interrupted moments like that. She stood at the edge of every conflict with her hands folded as if neutrality made her innocent. Her attempts at peace sounded more like quiet surrender, and I often wondered whether she feared disagreeing with Dad or simply preferred harmony over honesty. The few times I looked to her for support, she averted her eyes and let silence settle as the final answer. Her passivity shaped the household more than her words ever could, because it reminded me that I was on my own whenever tension rose. There were subtle ways my place in the family diminished over time. When Logan wanted the larger bedroom, Dad moved my belongings without warning and told me it was practical. When there was one ticket left to a school trip, he insisted Logan deserved it because he had been through more stress. When I earned an award for an essay, the certificate disappeared from the refrigerator within a day, replaced by a drawing Logan scribbled in 5 minutes. Each shift chipped at my confidence until it felt normal to expect less than everyone else, which made it harder to understand why I kept hoping things would change. The breaking point came during a weekend when Logan lost his phone at a friend's house and claimed I had taken it out of jealousy. Dad acted before asking a single question. He stormed into my room, demanded an explanation, and refused to believe me, even when Logan found the phone buried under the seat of his friend's car. Instead of acknowledging the mistake, Dad insisted that my attitude had caused unnecessary conflict and declared he was tired of dealing with my supposed behavior. His frustration grew into something heavier, and he told Mom that removing me from the house would bring peace back into the family. I stood in the hallway while they discussed it as if I were an inconvenience instead of their daughter. Logan watched from behind the railing with the same smug expression he wore the day the door closed behind me. Dad did not wait for my reaction. He simply pointed toward the exit and announced that I would leave by the end of the afternoon, which left no space for argument. Although fear rose in my throat, there was also a quiet understanding that this decision had been forming long before that day, shaped by years of uneven treatment and silent approval. I realized that the moment Dad gave Logan everything I lost, the ending had always been waiting. The next morning, I stood in front of my Grandma Nora's house with my suitcase behind me, feeling the weight of everything that had unraveled overnight, settling into my chest in a way I had never experienced before. When she opened the door, she stared at me long enough for worry to overtake the initial surprise, and she stepped aside immediately, as if letting me stand outside any longer felt unthinkable to her. Nora guided me to the nearest chair and sat across from me, watching my hands tremble slightly even though I kept trying to hide it. She asked if I was hurt, if I had slept at all, and if I needed anything to eat. I shook my head because every question made me realize I had not heard concerns spoken with that kind of sincerity in what felt like years. Her voice softened, but her expression sharpened as she leaned forward. "Tell me what happened, Talia." I took a slow breath and tried to steady my voice before I told her how everything unfolded. I repeated the exact words Dad threw at me, the ones that cut through whatever was left of my place in that house. "You were a mistake. Why waste a room on you?" I told her how Mom stayed silent not because she disagreed, but because she avoided taking my side in anything that involved Logan. I explained how Logan watched the entire incident with an expression that showed he knew this outcome had been building for a long time. Nora pressed her hand against her chest when she heard about the door locking behind me, and for a moment I wondered if speaking the truth out loud made it heavier for both of us. She asked if I had grabbed every important document and urged me to open my suitcase in case something had been misplaced during the rush of leaving. When I handed her the envelope of papers I had taken with me, she unfolded each page, carefully scanning every line with the sharp attention of someone who refused to overlook even the smallest detail. She paused when she reached a photocopy of a document related to the house I had lived in my entire life. Her brow furrowed while she reread the page, and she held it closer as if the handwriting might change if she gave it more time. When she looked at me again, her expression carried both disbelief and recognition. "This signature is not your dad's," Nora said, lowering the paper slowly. I stared at her without fully understanding the meaning behind her words. She tapped the signature line and continued, "I know this handwriting. This belongs to your grandpa. He signed this." The realization did not hit me immediately. I had grown up believing the house belonged entirely to my parents, and I had never questioned it because the subject had never been open for discussion. Nora stood up with a determined expression and walked toward the drawer where she kept the contact information of people she trusted for serious matters. She found the number she needed and reached for the phone without hesitation. "I need to speak with the property manager," she said in a tone that left no space for delay. While she waited for the call to connect, I sat there wondering how many truths had been hidden behind the walls of the house that had dismissed me so easily. When the person on the other end answered, Nora introduced herself and requested detailed verification of the ownership status of the property. Her voice held a firmness that made it clear she would not stop until she reached the bottom of whatever had been concealed. After a few minutes, she ended the call and turned to me with an expression that carried both resolve and a hint of anger she had not voiced yet. "Talia, this situation is not what you think. There is much more underneath it." The way she said it told me that the life Dad tried to push me out of was about to shift in a direction none of them were prepared to face. That afternoon, Grandma called me into the living room with a seriousness that quieted every thought swirling in my mind, and I followed her with the uneasy sense that whatever she had discovered would shift the ground beneath us once again. She sat me down before reaching for a small box she kept on a high shelf, the one she rarely touched, unless something genuinely demanded her full attention. The moment she opened it, I recognized the old folders she had saved after my grandpa passed away, and the sight of them pulled a strange mix of curiosity and hesitation out of me. Grandma laid several documents across the table and carefully unfolded papers that carried signatures I had never seen before. She explained that my grandpa had handled his affairs with a precision that left little room for confusion, which made her question why there were missing records around the house recently. She suspected Dad might have taken advantage of the years he controlled everything, especially since he had access to files no one else knew existed. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that her suspicions were not baseless worries, but conclusions drawn from patterns she had quietly witnessed for far too long. As she continued reviewing the papers, my phone vibrated. I almost ignored it until I saw a notification showing that Logan had posted something online. The caption implied I had stormed out in anger, followed by comments claiming I had always been unstable. The distortion of the truth hit me harder than I expected, especially because it came from someone who had watched me get thrown out. Logan knew exactly what he was doing, and his lies spread quickly. I reached out to my friend Ava, who was the only person I trusted to verify whether the post was gaining traction beyond our usual circles. She responded within minutes and confirmed that several people had already shared Logan's version of the story. Her message helped me see how fast misinformation could twist reality, and although the situation hurt, I thanked her and told her I would handle the rest. I knew I could not lean on her for more than that, because this part of my life needed to be managed within the family before it spiraled out of control. Grandma noticed my reaction and asked to see the messages. She read them slowly, then folded her hands with a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the tension rising inside me. She said that lies spread easily when people believe no one will challenge them, and she promised that we would not let falsehoods stand unopposed. Her certainty made me breathe differently, as if the air in the room had shifted from heaviness to a quiet form of resolve. Without wasting time, Grandma picked up the phone and dialed the estate manager, Mr. Holt, who had overseen my grandpa's assets long before Dad involved himself. She introduced herself with calm authority and requested a review of every document tied to the property where I had grown up. I watched her posture tighten slightly as she waited for his response, and something about her presence made me realize that she was prepared to confront far more than forged signatures or missing files. When she ended the call, she told me that Mr. Holt would arrive the next morning to conduct a full verification. The idea of facing whatever truth lay behind those papers made my stomach twist, not because I feared the outcome, but because I sensed how deeply this revelation could unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. Grandma reached over and placed her hand on mine. She said the truth had waited long enough and that it was time for me to see exactly what had been hidden from me. Her voice carried a conviction that steadied my nerves, and for the first time since I left the house, hope settled beside the fear that had followed me everywhere. 2 days later, Mr. Holt appeared at Grandma's door, and the quiet determination on his face made it clear that he had come with more than a routine update. I stood beside Grandma while he set his briefcase on the low table and explained that he had spent the past 48 hours reviewing every document tied to my grandfather's estate, including the property records that had been altered over the years. His voice carried a calm authority when he stated that the house in Nevada had never been transferred to Dad in any capacity, and that the original beneficiary named in the finalized paperwork was me. The realization settled over me with a weight I had never felt before, because it was the first time anyone had spoken with certainty about something I had always been told did not belong to me. Grandma listened with a seriousness that left no room for interruption, and when Mr. Holt informed her that the situation required a face-to-face meeting with my parents, she agreed without hesitation. He made the call from the kitchen, and within an hour, Dad and Mom arrived with expressions that shifted between confusion and irritation, as if they had been summoned for something beneath their attention. Mr. Holt invited them to sit, And the moment they did, he opened a folder filled with documents that he arranged in a careful sequence on the table so there could be no misunderstanding about their authenticity. Dad leaned back and attempted to dismiss the findings by claiming he had only managed the property to keep it from falling into disrepair, yet he avoided mentioning why he had never told me that I was listed as the legal heir. Mom rested her hands on her lap and looked away each time Mr. Holt asked whether she had known about any of the changes made after my grandfather passed. Her silence circled the room like a heavy mist because it suggested more than she was willing to admit aloud. Mr. Holt stayed steady, explaining each page with patience, and the more he spoke, the more Dad's confidence wavered as he realized that every excuse he tried to put forward was contradicted by dates, signatures, and notarized statements. Logan arrived moments later, called by Dad, and carried the same careless attitude he had displayed online. Mr. Holt addressed him directly and stated that the false accusations he had spread needed to be removed immediately because they interfered with an active estate matter. Logan attempted to argue that he had only repeated what he believed to be true, yet Grandma interrupted with a firmness that cut through the tension when she said that repeating lies did not absolve anyone from responsibility. Logan's eyes shifted downward in a way I had rarely seen, and he finally admitted that the live stream had been exaggerated. He agreed to delete it, though reluctance pulled at each word. The meeting moved forward with Mr. Holt providing a summary of what would happen next, explaining that the Nevada property would be transferred formally into my possession once the last administrative steps were completed. Dad protested again, but his arguments no longer held the shape of certainty and instead felt like fragments of excuses that crumbled as soon as they were spoken. Mom continued to distance herself from the conversation, yet there was a moment when her eyes met mine, and I could not tell whether she felt guilt or simply discomfort from being forced to face the truth. As the discussion came to a close, Mr. Holt handed me a copy of the verified documents and instructed me to keep them secure until the transition was finalized. My hands trembled slightly when I took them, and for the first time since being pushed out of my own home, a small sense of stability found its way into my chest. The room stayed silent after Mr. Holt left, and even though no apology came from Dad, Mom, or Logan, their silence held the acknowledgement they refused to say aloud. When Grandma placed her hand on my shoulder, I felt the first quiet rise of hope. It was not dramatic or overwhelming yet. It was steady enough to remind me that the truth had finally begun to surface, and for once, the ground beneath me felt like it belonged to me, rather than shifting under someone else's control. The next morning carried an uneasy quiet into the house, and I barely had time to gather my thoughts when Dad appeared unannounced at Grandma's front door, without even attempting to hide the impatience settling on his face. He stepped inside before she could properly welcome him, acting as if he had every right to reclaim control over a situation that had slipped through his fingers. His eyes moved across the room with the kind of confidence he always wore whenever he believed he could talk his way out of consequences. "I came to clear this misunderstanding before it becomes something bigger," he said with a voice that tried to sound calm, despite the irritation weighing it down. He turned toward Grandma in an attempt to soften her stance, insisting that the entire issue had been exaggerated by people who did not understand how families sometimes argued. He spoke as if the years of neglect could be brushed away by a convenient explanation. Grandma watched him with a steady expression that revealed none of the exhaustion she felt from everything she had learned over the past few days. "You stood by and allowed things to happen to her that no parent should ever allow," she said, refusing to shift even slightly. "You pushed her aside every time she needed you, and now you want me to forget all of that because it is easier for you." Dad took a slow breath, as though preparing a careful response, but his attention flicked toward me when he realized I was standing near the hallway, and his patience quickly thinned. "You could have spoken to me instead of running here and turning everyone against me," he said with the kind of conviction that made my chest tighten. His voice rose just enough to reveal the frustration hiding beneath his calm exterior. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, I replied, holding his gaze even though my stomach felt heavy. I did not turn anyone against you. I just told the truth about how I was treated. The room stilled for a moment before Mom walked inside behind Dad with an apologetic smile that seemed rehearsed. We did not mean to make you feel unwanted, she said while keeping her eyes lowered to the floor. Things were tense at home, and we said things we did not mean. The absence of sincerity pressed through every word she attempted to offer. Grandma stepped forward and stopped Mom from continuing. None of us expected her next sentence. 30 days. Then you leave the house, she said with a resolve so sharp that even Dad's confidence faltered. The property belongs to her, and if you refuse to respect that, I will have Mr. Holt take the necessary steps to remove you. Dad opened his mouth as though searching for a counter-argument, but the certainty in her tone stole any authority he thought he still had. Logan appeared behind them in the doorway, and when he realized Grandma had taken such a firm stance, he avoided my eyes for the first time in a long while. I stood very still, allowing the weight of the moment to settle into my chest. For the first time since everything began, I felt something shift inside me. It was not triumph, or revenge, or satisfaction. It was relief. Quiet, steady, undeniable relief. For the first time, someone stood beside me with complete conviction, and realizing that Grandma had chosen to protect me gave me a sense of hope I had almost forgotten. 1 week later, everything began to shift. News reached Grandma's house early that morning, and I learned that Dad had been removed from a major construction contract after a formal review of his recent conduct. The company handling the project cited a breach of professional trust, and although the announcement was brief, the consequences were unmistakable. His removal triggered an immediate financial setback that neither he nor Mom had prepared for, and their attempts to contain the situation failed as the story passed quietly but steadily through the community. Mom faced a difficult adjustment once their savings began to thin. She accepted temporary work at a local clerical office, a position far outside her usual comfort, and she carried herself with a noticeable heaviness each time she left for her shift. Her choices revealed the pressure that had built around their lives, and I recognized with a complicated mix of sympathy and distance that their circumstances were no longer shielded by Dad's former influence. Logan encountered his own reckoning when the school's administration suspended his involvement in the campus leadership club. The review panel determined that his recent online behavior violated the school's standards of conduct, and the suspension arrived with a formal notice that carried no room for negotiation. Logan kept the details quiet, but the withdrawal in his expression revealed how quickly the situation had turned against him. Throughout the week, Grandma continued to guide me through the documents that confirmed my legal rights to the property in Nevada. Her calm attention steadied my nerves while she explained the significance of each signature and date, and she emphasized the importance of keeping every file organized for future reference. Her steady approach softened the tension I had carried for so long, allowing me to see the situation through a lens shaped by responsibility rather than fear. The final step in the process required my signature before a notary, and the moment I completed the last line, the reality of my inheritance settled into place. I felt a mixture of disbelief and quiet strength as I accepted the folder holding the official transfer. Grandma watched me with a gentle pride that warmed the space between us, and she reminded me that protecting what belonged to me was not an act of defiance, but an act of self-respect. By the end of the week, Dad, Mom, and Logan began packing their belongings as the deadline to leave the house approached. Their movements carried a subdued urgency, and although Dad attempted to maintain his composure, the shift in authority was unmistakable. Mom avoided meeting my eyes while Logan moved through each room with a silence that contrasted sharply with the confidence he once wore so easily. Grandma remained consistent in her resolve. She reviewed the property documents once more and walked me through the next steps required for proper management. She taught me how to communicate with the estate office, how to maintain financial oversight, and how to avoid the mistakes that had allowed so much confusion to grow over the years. Her guidance wrapped around me like a steady hand, giving me the confidence to face responsibilities that had once felt overwhelming. As the week closed, I recognized that the balance of power within my family had shifted permanently. The change did not erase the pain that had led us here, but it allowed me to breathe with a clarity I had never known. For the first time, I carried something that belonged entirely to me, and Grandma's unwavering presence made the path forward feel possible. A month later, I could finally look back on everything with a calm mind that no longer trembled at the thought of my old house or the people who had pushed me out of it. I had settled into the place that legally belonged to me, and each day inside it felt like a quiet affirmation that I had survived something far more damaging than I had once understood. I spent my mornings walking through the rooms while absorbing the steady realization that my life had stepped onto a path free from the shadow of their choices. I handled the mail, answered calls about property matters, and began shaping a routine that belonged solely to me. That sense of ownership grounded me in ways I had never known before, and I carried it into everything I did during those early weeks. Grandma moved in temporarily to help me navigate the legal and financial details that came with the house. She never treated it like charity or an obligation, and she used every conversation to show me how independence grows when someone finally stops apologizing for existing. She coached me through paperwork, talked me through potential repairs, and showed me how to evaluate long-term decisions that would keep the property stable. I learned quickly because her guidance carried a steady confidence that I absorbed without resistance. Meanwhile, my old family adjusted to a different reality. They had relocated to a modest rental across town, and although I never visited, I heard enough through the channels that still connected us indirectly. My parents worked through the consequences of choices they had dismissed for years. That shift did not satisfy me in a vindictive way, yet it affirmed that I no longer lived under the weight of their judgment. I continued building my life without revisiting the emotional ground where everything had once collapsed. Logan reached out after several weeks with what he claimed was an apology. His message circled around excuses before landing on a request for a conversation that he insisted would help both of us move forward. I read it slowly, searching for sincerity, but the phrasing revealed the same pattern I had grown up recognizing. I declined without hesitation. I no longer felt obligated to offer forgiveness that would only reset a cycle meant to pull me back into chaos. The distance protected me, and I intended to keep it intact. As the weeks progressed, I tasted peace in small but consistent ways. My evenings rested in silence that did not carry tension. My mornings arrived without fear of raised voices or sudden rules that shifted overnight. I cooked meals for myself, handled responsibilities that once felt beyond my reach, and found calm in the rhythm of a life that finally belonged to me. Grandma often reminded me that endings are rarely tidy, yet this one had given me room to breathe and grow. For the first time, I believed her entirely. The greatest shift in my life came from understanding that distance from harmful people is not cruelty, but clarity. It took time to accept that loyalty means nothing without respect, and that love cannot grow where someone is forced to shrink. Rebuilding my life showed me how peace forms when boundaries hold steady. Healing arrived slowly, yet it became stronger each time I chose myself, rather than the expectations that once controlled me. Thank you for staying with my story until the final moment. Your time means more than you know, and I truly appreciate every listener who chooses to walk through these experiences with me. Before you leave, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel and which hearts they reach along the way.